Mike Griffith here, standing live on the campus of the University of Alabama, right across the street from the Mal Moore Athletic Facility, Sewell Baseball Stadium behind me, Coleman Coliseum to my left, and the Alabama Crimson Tide coming right at you. You're a Georgia football fan. This Saturday at 4 p.m. in the SEC Championship game, Mercedes-Benz Stadium, where Alabama and Georgia meet again. Of course, that was the site of the College Football Playoff Championship game last January, where Tua Tagovailoa came off the bench and rallied the Tide for a 26-23 win in overtime. Talked with Tua today as well. I think you will find some interesting things from today's report here in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Just finished up with Nick Saban's press conference. Coach Saban today saying that Alabama may be mentally tired. Thought that was interesting. Alabama, the last two games, has gotten off to a slow start. And we're going to talk more about that here today on our Ingles on the Beat segment, brought to you by Ingles Supermarket each Monday. And obviously the On the Beat segment online on DogNation.com. You can read that article done earlier this morning about the statistical profile of how Alabama and Georgia match up, right down into all the NCAA statistics, into what they've done against common opponents, and schedule strength, which indicates that, Georgia has played a better schedule than Alabama this season. Could Georgia be the more prepared of the two teams? Certainly these teams somewhat familiar with one another, having played, again, in that national championship game last year, a 26-23 win. But today, getting back to the news, Nick Saban saying, I asked him about the slow starts the last two games. They were beating Auburn 17-14 in the Iron Bowl last Saturday. The week before, they were tied with the Citadel 10-10. And so I asked Saban today at his press conference about those slow starts and if he'd been able to figure out exactly why it was happening. And he said, you want your teams to be physically and mentally fresh at this time of season. And he said it's hard to tell when a team is mentally fresh, but by his logic, if they weren't physically fresh, they wouldn't be able to finish those last two games in the order that they did in dispatching of the Citadel and Auburn impressively. It was 52-21 against Auburn. So by his reckoning, Alabama is maybe mentally tired, and he talked about cutting back some this week. So he wants to make sure that they get plenty of reps and are prepared for what he called a very, very good Georgia team, a team that he feels is as balanced as any they've seen this year. He said yesterday on a teleconference that this would be the biggest challenge that they would face this year. Today, he changed that to this would be the biggest challenge they've faced to this point. Saban obviously watches his words carefully. I do think right now Georgia is the second best team in the country, though. I do believe that. I know Notre Dame is unbeaten, but I look at Georgia's schedule and the way the Bulldogs are playing right now, and I think they're playing as good as anyone not named Alabama in the country. Now, what I saw from Alabama in the Iron Bowl on Saturday was an offensive explosion in the second half. Tua completed 11 out of 12 passes in the second half, set a new scoring record at Alabama for touchdowns accounted for by a quarterback. 6 touchdowns by Tua in that game, 5 touchdown passes, and a running touchdown. And oh, by the way, he came out of the game early, and Jalen Hurts also threw a touchdown pass. And that very impressive 52-21 win over Auburn here in Tuscaloosa down the street at Bryant-Denny Stadium. Auburn was able to gash Alabama for some runs. I did a live report that night from Bryant-Denny Stadium you may have seen on the Dog Nation Facebook page. And I said I was more encouraged for Georgia's chances after watching Alabama against Auburn than I was before that game. Reason why was Auburn was able to run the ball with some success and really gash Alabama. Auburn had a 75-yard touchdown run called back in the first half of that game. And while Sean Shivers is certainly a fast player, I think DeAndre Swift is about as fast a running back there is in the country. And Georgia has had a big play offense all season long. The Dogs have been at their best when they've been explosive, and that's how they started the season, and that's how they've ended it of late, with Swift in the running game now shifting into gear, looking every bit the part of the number one ranked rushing offense in the SEC. Now, I talked with a coach at Tennessee, not to be named, not too long ago, and I said, who had the better run game, Alabama or Georgia? He said Alabama only slightly, though. He felt like the Georgia offensive line would be key. Clearly, the health of Ben Cleveland is important. Big Ben, arguably the best run blocker on the Georgia offensive line, and he's been very limited these last 3 games since returning from that broken leg that he suffered on September 22nd against Missouri. Kirby was asked about that today, and Kirby said nothing's changed. You guys ask me about it every week. We're trying to bring Ben back along, but that's an injury that leaves him very sore. And while Ben's been going through the practices, he's not put the stress of a full game on it. Not sure he's going to be ready for a full game either. I do think we'll see him some. Freshman Trey Hill had started in his place the last 2 games. I know he left the last game. Kirby updated that injury situation today, saying Trey's going to be fine. Trey's going to be fine. Monty Rice, a guy, and Cade Mays. Those are the 2 question marks. Monty probably not going to be 100% if he does play. We know Monty missed the last game with that ankle or foot injury that he hurt during warmups before the UMass game. He's obviously been the most productive inside linebacker for Georgia all season and a real key to the team. I did think Tate Crowder stepped up and played well in his absence, but Monty is the best option at inside linebacker, and Georgia fans probably hoping Monty gets back quickly. Cade Mays, another talented player who's played both offensive tackle and offensive guard, really played capable of playing all 4 of the 5 positions on the offensive line, everything but center. He has had that shoulder issue. Kirby is also saying wait and see on Cade Mays. Cade dressed for Georgia Tech, did not play. Practiced last week, put the pads on, but did not hit. So we'll wait and see on Cade Mays and what his availability is for Saturday, as well as Monty Rice. I would say Monty would probably be doubtful, and I would put Cade in the questionable category, although Trey Hill's emergence has helped, and certainly Ben Cleveland getting healthier. When you look at the matchup of this game, and the reason I talked about why I felt like Georgia's chances had increased after watching what Auburn was able to do, albeit for only one half of football, it was 17-14. I saw Auburn run the ball. And for Georgia to beat Alabama, they're going to have to run the ball. I saw Jake Fromm talked about that today. Not only does that open up the passing game and maybe somewhat neutralize the pressure a little bit, teams aren't as apt to blitz if you're running the ball well. Obviously, if you bring a linebacker from the outside or a corner and you hit them with a run in the gap that they're not coming in, that can be an explosive play because you're essentially taking 1 or 2 defenders out of the play. So when you're running the ball effectively, teams are not as apt to blitz there, and also not as apt to blitz because you're staying ahead of the chains. You're staying in good down and distance situations. 2nd and 5, it's hard for a defense to know what's coming. 2nd and 10, chances are you're going to throw the ball, and you're more apt to see a pressure package. So the run game is going to be very important for Georgia. In addition to being able to move the ball and score, that keeps Tua and this incredible Alabama offense off the field. I think they've had 500 yards or more of offense, I want to say, in 11 of 12 games. And that amazing statistic, Alabama has won their first 12 games this season by 20 or more points. There's only one other team in college football history that can say they've done that for 12 games to start a season. That was 1888 Yale. And I don't think I really count that. They weren't wearing face masks, and it was a completely different game. So the level of dominance that Alabama has had, certainly arguably the most dominant college football team in the modern era, and Alabama wants to keep that on track. We talked with Jonah Williams today. Jonah's starting offensive tackle for the Crimson Tide, and he put some perspective on that. When I asked him about the historical significance of what Alabama's trying to do, beating everybody by 20 points or more, making their case as the greatest college football team in the modern era. He said, it doesn't really matter what we've done these first 12 games. We're going to be judged a lot more on what we do the next 3 games. And it kind of reminded me of something that J.R. Reed said back at Media Day last summer when we interviewed the Georgia junior safety. And J.R. Reed said that the SEC championship game didn't mean anything. And I remember I went on Feinbaum's show on the SEC network later that day and repeated those words. And Feinbaum kind of scoffed at me. And I said, look, that's the mentality there, Paul. I'm not the one saying these words or planting these seeds in Georgia's mind. But the point of it is that because Georgia didn't win the national championship, it took away the significance of winning the SEC title. And this is a byproduct of what the college football playoff does. And I know fans love playoffs and things like that, but it does diminish conference titles. It certainly diminishes bowl games. And you can see how the players have quickly adjusted their attitudes towards that. Now, certainly Georgia will always appreciate winning the 2017 SEC championship. it enabled them to go through the front door and get into the college football playoff. And of course, most of you watching know I'm a big proponent that you should have to win your conference championship game to qualify for the college football playoff. Otherwise, you get in with what essentially amounts to a bye. Think about it. Alabama didn't have to play in the conference championship game, so Alabama actually played one fewer game than the teams that did play in a conference title game. Advantage Alabama. Talk about being mentally or physically tired, as Saban did today. That certainly helps that Alabama had an extra week of preparation last year. And that brings us to the question about this year's game. I think it's pretty clear that for Georgia to get into college football playoff, they have to beat Alabama. Now, the same may not be true for Alabama. If Alabama were to lose to Georgia and have one loss, would the Crimson Tide get in ahead of a one-loss Oklahoma or a one-loss Ohio State? Uh, you could make the argument that Alabama's loss isn't as bad as the loss that Oklahoma suffered to Texas, or as bad as the loss that Ohio State suffered to Purdue. And that was kind of the criteria last year. Now, I don't know what the criteria is going to be this year. I've said pretty vocally on a number of radio stations, as well as here on our Dog Nation page, that I don't think this college football playoff committee has done a very good job this year. I have not been satisfied with their answers. When I asked them 2 weeks ago why Michigan was ranked ahead of Georgia, the answer was that Michigan had the number one defense in the country. Well, Michigan just gave up about 62 points. And I didn't need to see the Ohio State game to tell you that Michigan was not a better football team than Georgia. All you had to do was watch your eyes and watch Michigan barely beat a Northwestern team that lost at home to Akron and Duke this year. But yet and still, these are the people making the decisions. And I think this is something that needs to be scrutinized a bit more and looked at, because anytime you put the decision in the hands of humans, there's always room for an error. I preferred the BCS formula. I'll tell you that flat out, because you knew what you were dealing with. The formula was out there. You could schedule and play accordingly. So my little tangent on the college football playoff and the committee is over with. Now, as far as what Tua had to say today, he was asked a lot about the slow starts, and he pointed out that at the beginning of the year, Alabama was starting really fast, and that the team really wasn't challenged much in the second half, and how that's kind of flipped the second half of the season, where Alabama's not starting as well as they did in the first half, but they're finishing much better. And so Tua now says that they're going to have to focus on their execution. He said the key to a faster start against Georgia is going to be better preparation this week here in Tuscaloosa for that SEC championship game. Nick Saban said that he may cut back some things. Certainly, they want to be prepared for Georgia, but he said that it's very important that his team is fresh, both physically and mentally, for Georgia when they play that game at 4 p.m. on Saturday there at Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta. So I'm reporting live from Tuscaloosa, right across the street, the Malmore Athletic Facility. That's where Nick Saban spoke this morning. I thought it was pretty funny. Cecil Hurt, one of my former colleagues when I covered Alabama here back in the 1990s, asked how much Alabama missing their dime defensive back could affect them for Georgia, and does he know what he's going to do yet to adjust? And Nick says, "Well, I'll just tell you, he said, actually, I'll just go ahead and call Kirby Smart and tell Kirby what we're going to do. How about that?" And he goes, "And then you can call Kirby and ask him what we're going to do." So Nick got a little sassy with the media today. I couldn't help but laugh about that. He's he's pretty humorous. He's pretty humorous and off the cuff, and he seized the moment there to poke some fun at the media, who asked what they would do without that defensive back who was ejected from the Auburn game in the second half for targeting. So I don't think it's that big of a deal. When I look at the depth that Alabama has and the likelihood that Alabama will be in a dime package that often against Georgia, I don't think it's a make or break type of deal that would make me change my betting line on the game. And how about that betting line? It came out Sunday night on Vegas Insider that Alabama was a 10.5 point favorite to beat Georgia. The line quickly shot up to 13.5, which interestingly enough, Dog Nation did a story a couple of weeks ago, and we asked an online entity what the line would have been 2 weeks ago, and they told us 13.5. So the line had fallen to 10.5 when it was set Sunday night, and it's jacked quickly back up to 13 points right now. The bettors putting their money on Alabama. They believe Alabama will continue this string of dominance that the Tide has enjoyed, beating everybody by 3 touchdowns or more this season. Nobody's been close when the final bell is rang. Now we've seen some teams play Alabama close for a half of football. Auburn trailed 17-14 at the half of the game that I covered for Dog Nation and the AJC on Saturday down the road at Bryant Denny Stadium. And of course, the week before, I think we were all stunned to see the Citadel and Alabama tied up at 10-10. Now the Citadel was an option team. Obviously, Georgia is not going to run the option against Alabama. I know I've heard some people suggest that, but the option requires such intricate timing that it's just not something that you can get prepared for in 1 week or even 2 weeks. I do think we'll see Justin Fields in the red zone, and I do think we'll see him in short yardage package. Justin has been so effective. I think he's 4 for 4 in these third or fourth and one or one to go situations at the goal line. I don't think he's been stopped yet. And of course, we all know that he's got a big arm and he can throw the ball. That dual threat ability is what makes him so special. Certainly, Tua possesses the same sort of things. I'll be interested to see how much of a weapon Tua is running the football against Georgia. Today, he revealed that he did not wear a knee brace in that last game. You remember some PCL injury he had earlier this season, and he started wearing a knee brace. You may have noticed his mobility was affected. Tua confirmed that today. He said, "That's right. I didn't have the same mobility." So I asked the doctors if they could remove it. Tua feels a lot more comfortable and a lot better without that knee brace on. And boy, can he run. And he came in there today. And, his upper body, doesn't look like anything special in terms of the size of it. But you see the guy's legs, and they're like tree trunks. I mean, this guy is stout and strong, and you can see why he's able to shake off 275-pound defensive tackles. I mean, he is an impressive physical specimen. We know he's got a very strong arm, as Kirby Smart talked about. He can make all the throws. He's got the intangibles that you look for. He's a big thinker. When we talked to him after the Iron Bowl game and asked him about Nick Saban's halftime speech, I think Tua called it a hoorah talk. He said, some guys listen to Coach Saban and then other guys talk with their teammates. And he said, I kind of fall into that category. So he didn't even really hear what Nick Saban had to say. I mean, he doesn't need to get pumped up from Saban. It's like Tua is his own self-generating, positive, influential leader. And certainly his poise and calm, very evident when you talk with him. Thought it was interesting today. Tua was telling us about his friendship with Jake Fromm and how it's based in their religious beliefs and how they both have very strong beliefs and they both kind of come from the same place as far as that goes with upbringing and loving parents. And of course, they met at the Elite 11 and they've been friends since. Now, they haven't talked in a while, but interesting to hear Tua talk about Jake in that light and some of the friendships and the mutual respect that these teams have for one another. And boy, it's clear that Nick Saban respects Jake Fromm. He talks a lot about how Jake's able to make the players around him better, how he constantly gets them in the right plays, goes the right places with the ball. All the things that you hear Kirby say, Nick Saban's been echoing it this week as he's clearly impressed with Jake Fromm. Jake played good enough to beat Alabama, and had Georgia not blown in a secondary assignment, they would have beat Alabama. They were winning that game in overtime 23-20 before there was a breakdown in assignments in the secondary with a corner's failure to reroute the receiver and a safety's failure to rotate over properly on a 2nd and 26 play that now goes down in infamy for Georgia. I've said it all year. I said it at the start of the year. It's up to Georgia to determine the role of that 2nd and 26 play. Will that be something they'll reflect on one day and say we were that close to a national championship? Or will people look at that and say that's the play, that's the moment that spurred Georgia on to their dynasty? I look back at the LSU game this year, 36-16, and I don't think I thought I would be standing here talking about Georgia having a chance to beat Alabama after watching what happened to Georgia down there in Baton Rouge. But Georgia has improved so much. They're playing so well, and the momentum is undeniable. And watching Alabama struggle in the first half, the last 2 weeks, makes me believe Georgia's got a chance to beat Alabama. Georgia may be a 13.5-point underdog. Alabama has played outstanding, but I think Alabama has been a little sloppy the last 2 games in the first half. Talking with them today, they were calm. They seemed maybe even a bit too calm. Whereas I know what the sense of urgency has been like in Athens. Georgia Tech felt that sense of urgency when the Bulldogs raced to a 38-7 lead, and then Kirby pulled the starters and let everybody play. That led to a pretty happy locker room. Alabama, meanwhile, 17-14, a lot of mental errors in the first half against Auburn. Second half, they put it together, but I don't think they will have that luxury against Georgia. Georgia, a much better, more rounded football team than Auburn. And I think Nick Saban is trying to impress that to his guys right now as they prepare for practice that, hey, they need a great week of practice. They need to start fast and they need to hammer down if they're going to beat Georgia because Georgia football is playing as good as it has played all year. I think Kirby has his team